Good morning, everyone. Here we have Farrah Mitra with us, Igor and myself in the studio here with the Real Women in Tech. And Farrah is going to be our Real Woman in Tech today. A little intro on Farrah before we jump into the questions. Farrah is quite an inspirational figure whom I've admired over the last several years, but was even more impressed once she actually came to Google while I was there and conducted a fantastic workshop on Radical Candor that ended up being the foundation for me as a leader, the principal foundation of how I lead and how I bring teams together and my behaviors at work and even in personal life. So I owe a lot to Farrah, and over this course of research for this podcast, Igor also has learned a lot about Farrah, and we're really excited to have her on the show. And just a little bit intro, and then we'll dive deep into the questions. Farrah is an executive coach and an advisor specializing in leadership communications and people strategy. She has 15 years of experience at Bain as a strategy consultant and people and culture executive at hypergrowth tech companies. She has supported development of successful leaders across the industry, not just tech, and hence brings a glory of experience with her. Farrah's clients span the C-suite at Fortune 50 companies and also go all the way to the small startups that she supports and nonprofits that she supports with her endeavors. As a communications expert, Farrah is one of the 15 Radical Candor facilitators worldwide. That's quite a feat, Farrah. I don't know how you achieved that. I'm so curious to hear about that story later in the show, and has led over 200 workshops on how to give effective feedback. Her communicating change framework, which is very near and dear to her heart and is something new that she's bringing into this world, has helped leaders navigate and communicate change clearly and effectively, creating a positive employee experience, no matter how challenging the topics. And the world that we live in, there are a plethora of challenging topics that we are all dealing with on a daily basis. So thank you, Farrah, for bringing your creativity and planting the seeds for something so phenomenal. Can't wait to hear more about it. Does all her work through her leadership company, which she founded in 2019 called Green Read. And there is a story about that as well. So tune in and listen in until we start discussing more about Green Read. So with that, Farrah, again, thank you so much for joining. What a fantastic journey. You've taken quite an interesting path, definitely one that one must aspire. And I bet when you're at the airports and in conversations and workshops, people are like, how did you do this all? Tell us more about your journey. So from Bain to leading people teams in tech and now running your own coaching startup while also working with Radical Candor. Can you walk us through those early years and how they've shaped your unconventional journey?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you for that very, very kind intro. Yes, I would love to tell you more about my journey. So I have always loved everything people and everything business. So it might sound funny, but I was teaching dolls math at 7. I was definitely teaching and empowering and helping. And then I was definitely doing, at that moment, the version of business, which is math and numbers. And this theme has followed me everywhere. So in high school, I did a lot of community service. I did a lot of teaching, mentoring. Anywhere I could help. In college, I went into engineering, but not to be an engineer. I actually didn't want to be an engineer, but I love numbers. I love analyzing. I love thinking about problems. So interestingly, my junior year at Cornell, someone said, hey, you should go work at Bain because you love solving problems and you love helping people. So I got very excited. I did go to Bain to solve problems. And for me, it was actually a really hard choice because my body was saying, I want to go teach for America. I want to be on the ground. I want to be really hands-on doing this type of service. And I looked at Bain and I felt like they do pro bono work. They do tons of community service. There are people at Bain who sit on boards of nonprofits. They provide financially to nonprofits. And so it felt like there was a way to still go be in service of what I wanted and get really good skills to actually be able to empower others. So that's why I went. I got there. I was on our consulting side for almost 5 years, which is actually a little bit unconventional because I didn't go to business school. And I loved the clients and the problem solved. All that was all good. And I just volunteered for everything people. I'm like, I'll do the training. I'll do recruiting. I will do anything that involves people. And so I kept pulling and pulling and pulling back to people's stuff. And I feel like people will typically go tell all their friends they're going to leave the company. And I went and told all the senior people at Bain I was going to leave the company that I wanted to do people stuff. So I talked to our office head at the time, who was wonderful. And he said, with a lot of love and a lot of radical candor, he said, I don't know how qualified you are to go do people's stuff outside of Bain, but holy smokes, you know everything about Bain. You've done every role. You've stayed for a really long time. You could be really powerful here and you could start your career in people here. And he said, if you consider staying at Bain, we will get you a career coach. I will take the career coach, right? I will do that. And everything in the coaching was just people, 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 people. And so when the first ever role for a team member to be a strategy consulting on the training side opened up at Bain, I had told all the right people, right? I had told all the senior people who had their ears to the ground. And it was just a natural movement into the training space. So I loved it. I got to be a strategy consultant to rethink about their world-class programs to help build their online learning platform. And I did 2 executive senior leadership roles at tech companies. And at every part of my journey, I always looked at my mission statement. And my life mission statement is to be the warm support that helps people get to where they want to be. I'm like, I need to go coach, not go into tech. And I looked at that and I said, well, I need to know how to operate. I need to know what it's like to be a leader, and I need to know the challenges that leaders face. So that's why I ultimately went, because I felt like it would be a good stepping stone into my journey.
That is so fantastic. You know what I love about this is you've answered a lot of questions that we've asked some of our previous panelists. So how do you put yourself out there? Well, you start with telling people what you really want to do.
Yeah.
And raise your hand. Also, you emphasized on the mission statement. I found that really powerful. How early in your career did you define one for yourself? Curious.
Yeah. So the mission statement came out of the career coaching. So it was nice. Like I had that at that moment from making the pivot. So that was really helpful. And then again, I had to check in at each time. So a year after I started the executive level position, unfortunately, my mother-in-law got sick and we wanted to move to Houston. We wanted to be with her through good, bad, and ugly, not just the ugly. And again, I looked at my mission statement, and in tech, what I got was, well, at Bain, what I got was world-class everything, like professional development, business practices, business skills. In tech, I learned how you operate under extreme amounts of change. I got massive pattern recognition of what leaders struggle with. I struggled with my own leadership. I learned how a business operates. And so for me, that felt like the moment of like, now I'm going to go do the next part. And I'm going to take everything I care about and everything I feel like I'm good at. And now I'm going to go do the thing. So being that warm support and helping people get to where they want to be, for me, is this business. It's Green Read, which is executive coaching or coaching. I know we'll talk about it a little bit more and some facilitation and some advisory work, but it's an empowerment theme, really. So it sounds very clean and crisp how it worked, but that's because I can tell the story backwards. But I will tell you that I've always looked at my mission statement at every part of my journey to help me make a decision. And it may not have always been perfect, but I knew why each piece was going to help me get to where I am today.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's my holiday homework is what's your mission statement?
And I also wanted to ask you, in 2018, you started your own coaching company, and the name of the company is Green Read, and there is a special story behind them. Maybe you can share that story.
Yeah. So the exact quote is, "The green reed that bends in the wind is stronger than the mighty oak that breaks in the storm." So to just get to a little bit of context before that, I have had a lot of struggles in my life. So there were times where I couldn't walk. There were times where I couldn't use my hands. There was a time where I lost my mom in a car crash while I was at college and dealing with all my disabilities. And so there's always been kind of hard things in my life. And my family always taught us to be survivors. Like, we were coming from an immigrant family. And so I think they just always felt like we could lose things at any moment. And like, if we screwed anything up, it could be taken from us and we'd end up on the street. And it wasn't that they were being like dramatic to scare me. I think that was the moment of our life of like them coming here and working so hard. And so because of that, I always felt like I had to do things right. I always felt like I had to be a perfectionist. I always felt like I had to be a survivor. So my mom passes away and I go back to Cornell 7 days later because that's what we do. And that's what I thought my mom would want. Can't open a door at Cornell, like wait for someone else to open the door, like have someone help hold my lunch tray. Like I just figured it out. I literally did engineering with like no hands, right? Because I felt like I always had to do really well. And what that meant is I'm a fantastic employee because I have to be a perfectionist because I don't want anything to go wrong. I have a lot of pleasing tendencies that I've worked through, but result in really good client services. And I think what that meant for me was I was a high performer and functional on the outside, but just always constantly kind of a mess on the inside, and I was worried and I was nervous and I was kind of, buzzing on the inside. And I think it's because of the stories. Like, I think, 30 years later, my brain was still thinking, don't mess up or you'll be on the street, or get everything right or everything will be terrible. And it's not that I'm not a high functioning person. I just think my body was like on autopilot. So back to the name of Green Read. To me, Green Read is about this quote. And to me, the mighty oak is this rigid way of thinking. You have these stories and they drive you and you're on autopilot. And that's the way the world is. And the green reed can sway and it can bend and it flexes and it iterates and it understands the world is not black and white. And I told Shivam this on the phone, but the interesting part of this to me is like, I want people to feel like the green reed. I want them to update their stories. I want them to thrive. I want them to flow and be able to adapt to different situations. And literally, in Houston on May 16th, we had a storm that came out of nowhere. It was 20 minutes long. And in 20 minutes, oak trees, like mighty oak trees, just snapped. And I'm not talking about like one. I'm talking like all over Houston. Our entire street just had, in 20 minutes, just these things broke. And then there's all these like little trees that just stayed up, right? So I'd see a house with like a snapped tree, and then I'd see a house, these tiny little flowy trees that did nothing. And so for me, it's interesting to have actually seen this in the real world. So for me, I just want people to feel more like that green reed.
It's a beautiful story.
Yeah, that's actually a really beautiful story. And it leads me to the next question about your coaching specialization. And it seems like your coaching is mostly centered about mindset. Is this correct? Or do you work with different areas?
So it's a little bit of both. So how do I say this? So one is mindset's huge. So how did I go from the person who was constantly buzzing and worrying? I updated my mindsets. I did a lot of work to put myself in a place where I feel like I'm thriving. I do always have a little bit of a hard time with perfectionism and those things, but I'm self-aware. I have coping strategies and I've updated my stories. So absolutely, I help leaders unlock their mindset. And it's all the things you hear, like boundary setting, perfectionism, having a hard time delegating, micromanaging, working harder, having to get things right. So those are the things I help them unlock. Once that's unlocked, we can work with the skill building. Because Igor, for me, how it translated in my leadership was ownership. Like, I can't give anybody ownership of anything. What if they mess it up? Like, I'm going to be in trouble and on the street, right? So I know, because I think we're all very smart, like I know that it's good to delegate, but my body wouldn't do it. So there's no point in doing coaching with skill building if someone's body is going to reject that. So first we unlock the mindset, then we get to the skill set. Right. So if somebody is having a hard time having hard conversations, like first let's figure out why is that hard for them, get them to a place where they're more comfortable having hard conversations, then let me teach them. Because if they could have done it with skills, we would have done this already, or they would have read a book. Right. So to me, it's 100% of both. But I think about starting with the mindset piece and then going to the skill building. And I know there's different types of coaching, but in my executive coaching, Igor, it is practical. Like we're going to do the mindset stuff and it's going to go deep and we are going to dig into your stuff. But if having a hard conversation is hard for you, like we're going to practice that conversation and you're going to come out of this session like feeling confident, feeling comfortable, and feeling competent to do it. Because you can't just have the words. You actually have to have the confidence and the comfort with it. So it's about both.
It reminds me of when you were doing the workshop for Radical Candor, which we'll talk more about in a bit. And I remember feeling the difference just after the workshop. Like, finish it because you've practiced it.
Yeah.
You didn't read a book and say, okay, let me think about that. It's just, there's no thinking time. It's doing. And I think that makes that goes quite a feat.
Yeah. And Shivam, the reason why, I know we're going to talk about Radical Candor, but the reason why I like it so much is because it starts with mindset. Like the workshop is making sure that we recognize this is hard And people come into it very scared and hesitant and not finding this easy to do. We get them to understand why it's a gift. Then we go to pragmatic. So I don't know if you remember in the workshop, like you have to first be willing to do it. And then we teach you a lot of the practical tips and tricks that we practice. So that tie-in is so important to my philosophy, which is why I'm the biggest Radical Candor fan.
Before we get Candor, I'm surrounded by executive coaches around me. Igor has a fantastic practice, worldwide practice, and so he's got experience of talking to people across the globe. Farrah, yourself, you've been talking to startups, to nonprofits, to the Fortune 50s. What are some of the differences that you see in these environments, and what are some of the similarities? Like, you guys are like encyclopedias of human behavior and leadership. You want to tap into a little bit more of that? Yeah.
So I actually think there's not a lot of difference. So this is how I think about it. We all struggle. We all have stuff. Leadership is hard. At least I think leadership is hard personally. I think the environment you are in might change the intensity. So if you are in a Series A startup with tons of ambiguity, you're building something that's never been built before, constant change, you might have a little bit more stress and triggers around things that are hard for you, right? Especially if that's ambiguity or whatnot. You go to HP, it's built and tried and true, and maybe they're innovating in different ways, but they have a foundation. It just may be a bit lower. So to me, it's the intensity of what people feel. I actually think there's more consistency.
And what would those consistencies be?
Yeah. Oh, I'm going to be a broken record today, which is I think we are all very human. So we all have struggles, right? I don't know about you, Eeyore, but I don't find the struggles very different. There's always a different context or a different setting or a different thing for different people. But what people struggle with is actually quite similar. And I think we all have these autopilot things, right? These things that have been driving us for a long time. I think about the coaching is to really think about the humanity, right? To always have that empathy that this is hard for people and to get curious before furious, right? So if someone, and this happens all the time, someone's having a hard time with someone in a session, and it's not that that person's a jerk. It's literally that this person is struggling, right? Like they're having a hard time. My strategy, as you all now know, is perfectionism and pleasing, right? I need to control things and not upset anybody. For somebody else, their strategy might be to act critical. That might be how they handle the stress in the trigger. They're all hard strategies. They're all bad. They're all not ideal, but they are all actually just strategies when something's hard. And so a lot of times what I'm trying to do in the coaching is make sure people understand this is not like a person's a jerk or this person's an X or this person's a Y. I see Igor resonating and nodding. It's like, okay, this person's struggling, and what might they be doing in this moment that is causing that struggle? Okay, they're critical. So now when they start to be critical, they're actually what I call the bottom half of the circle, which is like a more reactive space than a more creative space. So actually, like, how do we get that person out of that place? How do you do that? And when you go to your place, how do you have that self-awareness and help you take yourself out, right? So we're not putting people in boxes. Everything is not terrible. It's like these are dynamics that we can work through, whether it's your own dynamic or the dynamic with another person.
Definitely makes sense. And I love your quote, get curious before you get furious. And I remember you shared a story about your daughter or being in a situation when she actually shared that quote also. And maybe you could share that little story.
My daughter teaches me about leadership all the time. Remind me which one. Is it about the eyebrows?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, and this one's like about mindset, but well, actually, so two things. One, there will be many times with my daughter where I will say something like, Amia, I wish you had just done that. And she goes, Mommy, get curious before furious. Like, it's already done. You just didn't see it. So she uses that a lot. The other story that I love that recently happened with her that's very much about being in a mindset and how you can be a great actor, but your mindset always shows through, is that my daughter said, Mommy, you're so, like, why are you mad at me? I said, I'm not mad at you. Total fib. I know that's horrible, but total fib. I'm not mad at you. And she said, are you sure? And I said, yeah, I'm really not mad at you. And she looked at me, she said, then put those eyebrows down. It was like, no matter how, like when you are dealing in leadership or when you are working with people, and we talk about the mindset piece and why it's so important, is that no matter how you feel and how good an actor you are, people will always know, right? So when I work with leaders around change and communicating change, I know this is not ideal, but we are all human. Sometimes when leaders are constantly communicating change, sometimes they're frustrated because they're like, why can't we just move on? Like, why are people having a hard time? And I know that's horrible, but we're also all human and leaders get frustrated with situations. And when you go communicate that change, I know that you're going to be diplomatic and kind and empathetic, but they already know how you feel. Like people know, like my daughter knew there was no way. I thought I was doing a great job of acting. She knew. So that's another thing is like when you communicate change or when you're a leader, you can't push through it. You actually have to authentically have that mindset. And so when we get to talking about communicating change in the framework, a big part is helping people see what mindset they're in and what mindset they want to shift into so that they don't have the put your eyebrows down a situation that I had with my
Yeah, such a great story. And all three of us have daughters, and it's interesting how much you can learn from our kids. Let's dive a little bit deeper into Radical Candor for those who are not that well familiar with it. Can you give us a quick intro into that approach and tell us what it's all about?
Yeah, sure. So Radical Candor is all about the framework, but it's all about how do you give feedback in both a kind way and a clear way. So I think people think that either I'm going to be really nice and I have to sugarcoat and I do all the things, or I have to come across like a jerk and be really jerk. Radical Candor is how do you both be kind and clear in a way that feedback is a gift, right? So, for example, my trainer is a beautiful example of this. My trainer is always giving me feedback because it's weightlifting and I can get hurt if she does it. Even if I'm a degree up, I can get hurt. And she always gives it kindly, but she is exceptionally clear. If she's like, hey, Farrah, like, maybe, do you think you could, but you're really good at weight? Like, no, I'm going to get hurt, right? Like, she is in service of me in 45 minutes. I promise you, she probably gives me 45 pieces of feedback because she wants me precise and she wants me to do well and she wants me to lift correctly and get strong and healthy and all the things. And so she's always in service of me. And she gives it kindly and she gives it clearly. And then it's the gift, not, oh my gosh, you're so terrible at the weightlifting, or I feel bad, or she feels bad. We just have a rapport and a trust where she cares for me personally and she challenges me directly.
Sounds, well, it's a proven and great approach. Can you tell a little bit more? How did you get into it and how it all started?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a funny story. But so I've always believed in radical candor, right? I've always believed when you have that trusted relationship, you're in a caring relationship, it will allow you to say the thing you need to say. So at that first tech company, my boss and I were constantly working 6 a.m. to midnight. Things were changing all the time, working in 15-minute meetings. We had a trust and a rapport with each other that we could say anything we needed to. So if I went into his office and said, oh my gosh, actually, I think that's a terrible idea, my boss wouldn't be like, ooh, you're a horrible person. He'd be like, thank you for saving me 3 hours tonight, right? Like there's an ability to say the thing you need to say that really helps somebody. So I've always believed that. And I've always believed you have to have the care person in that trusted relationship. I didn't have the words or the framework or the articulation of it. I just knew those components were really important. An article for Kim Scott came out, I don't know how many years ago, but it was in First Round Capital, which is one of the best sources of really high quality content. And I read this article and this is amazing. Like, this is the thing. And she put it into a framework. It hit the mindset and the skill set stuff that I really care about. And then it was super practical and pragmatic and very usable because it's not theory. It is literally like the real world where she came up with this. And then I became a little obsessed and like told everybody about it, like screaming from the rooftops. So, which is a good thing because one day Kim Scott emailed someone at that tech company and said, do you know of anybody who might be interested? We want to add one person. And she hits forward and she sends the email. And I like freaked out. I write back in capital letters, heck yeah. And then 5 minutes later, I'm like, yes, And by the way, thank you so much. I'd be really interested. Could you connect me with Kim Scott? Next thing I know, I'm connected with Kim and I'm freaking out because now I've met like the celebrity of my life. And then the rest is history. So that's maybe like being really clear about what I cared about, kind of like the Bain story, right? Like I told I cared about, and then it kind of came together. So I don't know what you call it, but it was very, very excited and happy to be a part of it. So
divine intervention is what we call it.
And a lot of like obsession and screaming from the rooftops about it.
Yeah, but it's a beautiful story. I mean, when you're actually interested in something and you believe that it works and you start sharing, it can manifest itself in real life. And I think the beauty of the story and what I find amazing about your career and about your coaching practice is that you did over 200 workshops, and I read some of the reviews and people give you a lot of praise. People usually are really satisfied and they get a lot of value from those workshops. Can you tell us what usually resonates with people the most and what they find the most valuable in those workshops?
Yeah, I think first is what Shivam talked about, which is that you can have both. You don't have to be like overly nice. Like there's a way to find the balance, and that there's a framework and a language that you can actually use and understand. I think that's first. But from a content perspective, I'll tell you the like top hits of the workshop from my perspective. One is if you want to create a culture of feedback, the most important thing you can do is actually start by getting it. So everybody's talking about giving feedback, but if you go out and get feedback, like, yes, you're going to grow as an employee and a leader and a person and all those things. Absolutely. But I genuinely believe this. If you go out and you ask for feedback and you show that you can take it, that you want it, that it is useful, that you know how to incorporate it, that it is frankly safe to be able to do, then you're going to be able to give it, right? So Kim always says, your ability to take it gives you the right to dish it. What I did in my old world, and I really did this genuinely, but what I did in my old world with warmth and a smile, because I really did want the feedback, is I would say, hey, what feedback do you have for me? Or do you have any feedback? That's a bad question. I always got the no. It's like, in the entire planet, in the entire universe, what feedback do you have? Like, it's just not going to shoot. I'm just like, no, that's not going to work. The new way is what we call a go-to question. So it is an open-ended and specific question that you can ask. So an example would be, what's one thing I can start or stop doing to be a better leader? Last week, what's one place I made your life hard and one place I can make your life easier next week? Right? These are helpful, I think. They are open-ended but specific. They're quite bound in time or subject or place. My hope is they take the burden off the other person to have to actually say like, hey, there's a thing you're doing and here's the thing, versus I know I do things well and I don't do things well. Like, please help me understand. So there's so many benefits to these, and you can do these up, you can do these across, you can use these down. I've had therapists do these with patients. Like, this really works kind of everywhere. So that's number one. Like, people love the go-to question. They love how pragmatic it is. We're not asking you to do this in an hour. We're asking you to do this in like 5 minutes in a one-on-one, for example. And an example of how quickly you can do it is during a workshop, we have a 5-minute break. And during the break, I actually call the sponsor and I just say, what's one thing that I should continue to do or do differently for the second half? It's usually 90 seconds at the most, but it's timely and I can do my best for the second half of the workshop. So that's number one. Go out and ask for feedback. And then here's a super pragmatic tip. Number two is meet the emotion with compassion. And this one is like right up my alley because, as you know, upsetting people or messing up or not having things go well is very hard for me. So I would run away from feedback if I thought I was going to upset people, which means I was constantly running away from feedback. Now I've learned from Kim and Radical Candor, if you give hard feedback, you should expect a response. Like, you should expect humanity, right? Like, I've cried when I've gotten feedback. And so what you want in that moment is you want to have prepared the best you can, right? And then you just be a human in that moment, right? So instead of, it's okay, don't worry, you didn't know, blah, blah, like, instead of running away and trying to take away the tears and then never giving the feedback and then they never grow and learn, You can be empathetic. I know this is hard for you. You can be empathetic. You can care for them. Like, I'm here to support you. None of those takes away from the feedback. It cares for that person in the moment. It allows them to process. And then you can move to the feedback, right? Because one of the things the Radical Candor CEOs told me was when we shortchange the processing of the feedback and how it feels, then we're shortchanging the ability to actually change. Because like, oh, it's okay, don't worry, it's fine, it's not a big deal. Okay, so is this a big deal or not a big deal, right? You actually have to sometimes feel the feeling of the impact you've had or feel that just feel it. Like, we're human. So I think a lot of it for me is, how do you know that there is a way to care for someone when they have a reaction and just to expect it and know you could be the most prepared person in the room and you have no idea what's going to happen. Take the pressure off, do your best to prepare the feedback, and then just show up as a human and be as supportive and kind as possible without running away.
I love this framework so much, and I go back to the book so much, and I think this is the most gifted book in my records, because whoever becomes a new manager, if there's a new manager joining under me, this is the first book I hand over to them and say, read every word and read it again. And then when you forget and you get confused, go back to it again. The way I received this framework when I was introduced to it is, I was at a point where I was getting a lot of feedback. You're being extremely direct in your, communication with your direct reports. You might want to modify it, but nobody gave me the words.
Yeah.
They're not telling me, they're telling me to be softer. I did not know what tools I could use to bring out what I'm trying to exhibit here. I'm trying to exhibit integrity by saying that we all deeply care about this project, and I deeply care about you, and I want to let you know that you're screwing it up and we need to come out of it, and I'm with you. I'm going to help you through it. I'm working with you on a plan, but let me give you feedback in the way that is authentic. Do not ask me to mask it with a sandwich. I don't want to use those mechanisms. Radical Candor just gave me those tool sets, and I don't know if this is a good practice or not, Farrah, but even I recently started took over a team in NVIDIA, and I started by saying, I practice Radical Candor, which means I will be very direct with you. I might have not proven already that I deeply care, but you will see.
That is caring personally, right? Is to let somebody know how you are authentically, right? Because they haven't gotten to know you yet. And that's like many, many, many gold stars on all the things about because you did that really well. And I think, is it okay if I talk about the sandwich for 1 minute? Because I think it's
please, yes,
hot topic. So to me, the sandwich is, you're great, but you're not, but you are, right? And I find the sandwich, and I know this is going to be very harsh, but I find the sandwich selfish. And I will talk from my own perspective because I've used the sandwich a lot because I don't want people to be upset. So I use the sandwich. But I think the sandwich is about making people feel good, right? Like you are good, but you're not good, but you are good, don't worry, right? We're just trying to make them feel good versus there are things you do well and there are things you can do better, right? That it's so wildly confusing to use a sandwich. Nobody knows what to do with the sandwich afterwards. And I think how you can help people with that feeling that can be hard, again, and in broken record, is just to go back to empathy. It's not don't worry or you're really great or you're X. Don't worry, you're totally fine. It's I know this could be hard. Sorry, rants about sandwich over. And it's natural.
Yeah.
It is natural, human, but I think there's a shift we can take. I think we can go from being nice to being.
I think all of us have a lot to say about the sandwich model. And another thing that we don't usually consider is the difference in cultures. And because in my practice, I work with people from different countries of the world. The thing is, I come from Eastern Europe and I'm originally from Ukraine. And in Ukraine, we are extremely direct. So, and the people usually tend to give comments to Ukrainian people or Eastern European people when working in international environments that we are too direct. And then if you use sandwich model on, let's say, a person from Eastern Europe, the thing is, we usually don't understand the model at all. So the thing is, if you use this approach, you're great, but you're not, but actually you are. We hear that you did everything fine and there is nothing you can improve. This is all we hear. So we hear all is perfect, you did great. And in in our culture, sometimes if you want to be respected as an expert, you need to give a really harsh feedback. And the harsher feedback you give, the more like expert in the field you are. So in terms of international communities, and now we see teams of people from different countries usually working together with the remote work, even in the biggest big tech companies and in other industries. And I think why Radical Candor is a great approach, because as Shivam mentioned, it gives you exactly what to say. Like you can use it and you will be understood in different environments. So it's another factor, another reason why if you're still not familiar with the approach and you're listening to this podcast and to this episode, you definitely have to grab a book.
I love that it's a commercial.
Yeah.
Igor, just to tie off on that comment that's why I like the framework, because it's not a one size fits all approach. It's not saying here's how you give feedback. It's saying based on, frankly, if you're in a company, you can have an individual culture, a team culture, a company culture, a geographic culture, and your own culture, right? That's a lot of cultures to think about. So what's nice about Radical Candor is we're not saying this is one way to do it. Saying when you look at your relationship with that person, the level of trust, the level of rapport, what that culture is like, then you decide the right blend of caring personally and challenging directly. So I like that it accounts for cultural differences as well.
All right. I am now very excited of this next part of our podcast, because from the labs of alchemist Farrah is coming out a very exciting new framework, communicating change. And it couldn't be more timely, Farrah. I mean, just look at what's happening around us. Talking about change, it can be about so many different things, right? Like recently I was in a meeting and I got a ping of like, did you see the recent attacks that were happening in Israel? And we have a very large presence in Israel. And, there was a lot of conversations happening about just the political climate. And it made sense for us to communicate to our teams in different parts of the world that we are with them and take the time off as needed and do the right thing for your families. And that communication of, it's not communication of change, but it's communicating in a very difficult moment.
Yeah.
And are we all equipped with those frameworks? I thought of it and I was like, well, maybe that's where Farrah is going with it. Is like, and let's not forget all the rift season that just keeps coming in. It's a season that keeps giving, unfortunately. And tell us everything about it. What went into it? I'm sure there's a story, just like the Read and Radical Candor. I want to hear the story and talk to us about the framework.
Yeah. So super obvious. I really care about communication because I think it can impact people's experiences, right? So both personally and professionally. So here's a personal story. So when I was pregnant with my daughter, we did some genetic testing. We meet with a genetic counselor. They are an expert in genetic counseling. They tell people results every day. And we sit down and she looks at us and she says, you have a 1 in 293 chance of your daughter having a severe birth defect. Like, I think my husband and I literally almost broke. And she said, after a few seconds, which is completely normal for your age and a 0.003% chance. It's like, why didn't you say that first? Are you, oh my gosh. This was 7 years ago. I can still remember what the room looked like, what chair I was sitting in, how I felt in that moment, right? So communication matters, right? And if you go into the professional world, I remember a LinkedIn post where someone said, I learned I got laid off at 5 a.m. because there was a very large bank deposit in my account. And I was like, oh, this is horrible, right? And yeah, Igor's eyes are popping up. And similarly, Airbnb, who I think was one of the first people to do a very large layoff, this is years ago, people would post on Facebook and say, wow, I'm so bummed that this happened. And Airbnb treated we with respect and dignity. They want to support us. And to this day, I show companies the email that was sent out because it is clear. It is empathetic. It gives you everything you need to know. It doesn't freak you out. It is all the things. And so I care so much about this. And so this communicating change framework is about how do you communicate something clearly and effectively and empathetically? How do you do this so that people get the right message that you need and they feel valued no matter how difficult, right? No matter how difficult the message is, how can we create the best employee experience possible in that moment? And its birth was in helping someone communicate what to say after a riff. And they came back and they're like, whoa, that really worked. And then it was 2 weeks later, I said, what do I say now? And then we applied the framework and it worked. And then my husband had to communicate something difficult. And I'm like, can you just try this thing on? Right. And it worked. And so I've just been developing it over time. And I'm just like very proud of it. And now it has come into the world and it has been used by companies. So, but the idea is, how do you go from a more ad hoc or maybe fact-based communication to something that's more clear and empathetic together? So
increasingly, we are finding ourselves in more complex situations where communication can be can be a challenge, and getting it right, especially across geographies.
Yes.
Especially across geographies and generations for that matter. Let's not forget that. It might be okay to talk to a millennial in a certain way, but maybe it's not okay to talk to a Gen Z in the same way. And gender, and then the variations of gender that we're coming. So this is the right time for it. So, Farrah, when is the book coming?
Oh my gosh, not yet. Right. Loving, that's a very common question. Right now, what I am loving is that I am seeing this make an impact, because when all the riffs started years ago, I thought it was like a year, and then it became it just keeps giving. Right. And so honestly, what I am the most proud about is that I am making an impact. It's just me, but I'm doing my best to make an impact. And I don't know if it's helpful, but I can tell you how it's been used in these.
Yeah, no, I would love to. I wanted to go there next, is like, how is it being used in organizations, and specifically the emotional side of receiving that communication. So let's talk about that.
I've worked with many different companies and clients using this. Like I said, one of the places it has been the most helpful is in a RIF, right? Or a very large change. So what companies will do is they will partner and will book a set of 10 or 20 one-on-one sessions, like 30 sessions, 30 minutes. When the change is going to happen, they communicate to their leaders and they say, we want to give you a resource, a safe, private, confidential space, work to the framework. And then they will draft a communication. I will look at it, I'll give feedback, and then we get together for that 30 minutes and really work through it. And the number of situations isn't immense. So I've seen communications that I've helped with this framework of, you are getting laid off, you might get laid off. So many people from our group got laid off that now we can't help your group. I need you to work on more things because we have fewer team members. Your promotion's now on hold. Now we're doing performance management, which is something that happens often after a RIF. You didn't pass your performance plan, you're going on one. Or if you're an IC, so I've done this with ICs as well, my manager changed because of a restructure or RIF, and I was right about to get promoted. Like, I don't even know this person. How do I even have that conversation? Man, that promotion was really mismanaged, and I'm so disappointed in how it happened. And can you help me have a hard conversation? Or my new manager isn't really developing in my professional development, and I have no idea what to do. Or unfortunately, the list goes on, but those are the types of topics that leaders will book these sessions to go through. And we actually walk through the framework and we walk through the draft and we can practice that communication. So again, it's coming out of there with comfort and confidence and clarity.
Fantastic. Yeah. And there's always two sides of a coin, right? Like we think about the riffs, and we've always heard the stories of this is how it happened to me. But it's clear that the organizations that are having to make such tough decisions are actually going through a very thorough thought process.
Gosh, yeah.
Right?
Literally, Farrah, we can help, but this is a big thing. We don't have as much capacity. You are an expert in this. I mean, sometimes people would just book a session and cry. That's just what they needed in that moment, right? Sometimes they just needed to process where they were in their mindset, but we had to see the mindset shift in how they felt and how they wanted to approach the conversation first. But they needed a safe space to breathe a little and know the stories they were telling themselves, and then move to a better place. And then, in true Farrah fashion, once we have the mindset, then we went to the skill set of actually getting the right communication out.
Yeah, I think that this, you're touching upon the topic that I often think about when you're communicating changes. It is an emotional moment for both the people involved. So many managers who are having to communicate this change haven't done this before. I mean, I'll be honest, there was a phase in my career at Google, and it was towards the tail end where I was like, well, eventually I'll be one of the people who'll have to share such news. Really? And prepared. Am I ready to do that? So how does a leader emotionally prepare themselves for this and navigate the landscape of the emotion that is coming in the moment from the receiver Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. I think a couple things. One is, it's not surprising, just check your mindset, right? So if you're going into this with like, this person is going to get mad at me, or, if you are a receiver, someone's going to screw me over, it's just not going to go, right? So we have to come in with the right frame of mind. Two is, going back to that thing about people being human. If somebody gets angry at you when you are delivering a message, it doesn't mean they're a horrible jerk. It means that they're having a hard time processing the message, right? So being able to be empathetic, I hear that you're frustrated, being able to play back what they're saying makes them feel heard and actually helps you confirm understanding, right? But it can be easy to just interpret like, oh my gosh, look at this behavior versus this is a really hard message. Like they're having a hard moment, getting curious before fears. Like, tell me more about what's going on for you. What's on your mind? And also just knowing that if things get heated in a conversation, I think it's okay to step away, right? It's okay to say, this sounds like it's hard for both of us or for us, or it's a hard situation. Like, why don't we both take a moment away and come back to it, right? Or if things get very heated, let's say you're getting feedback that you don't agree with and you're getting defensive. Well, how you respond to feedback matters because you don't want to shut people down. So you might say like, hey, I'm naturally having a hard time with this. I want to step away and think about it. So when things get heated, other things, maybe one last tip is, can you say, hey, this feels hard in the moment. Like, what's one thing we can agree to, or what's one step we can take to XYZ? So to me, it's more about humanity of how can you take care of each other in a hard moment? How can you assume best intent? And then how might you be able to, transition to a better place to be able to communicate together?
Oh,
It's a beautiful framework, and I feel really grateful to you for developing it. And it makes our workplaces a little bit better, a little bit more human. And I actually have one question, which is interesting for me personally. In my coaching practice, I see a lot of people with different empathetic capabilities, if you can put it in that way. And it seems like some people are born a little bit more sensitive and they tend to be more empathetic, and other people are less. And it seems like a big part of the framework is being empathetic. And it might be a difficult question. It's not a trivial question, but maybe in your practice, you face some of similar situations. For example, I have some clients that are in more technical roles for whom it's a little bit difficult to be empathetic. Do you know any practices or exercises how you can develop empathy and how you can become more empathetic?
Yeah, that is a very good, hard question. A good one. I think there's a couple things, right? Like, rather than saying like, how can I be empathetic? Maybe it's giving yourself some tools or frameworks or questions. So one of them we talked about is, what do I want this person to say or feel afterwards, right? Someone's like, oh, that person's a total jerk. Hey, because they did that and they really want to screw me. Hey, what are 5 other things that actually might be happening for them? They're really stressed out. Actually, this project's not going well for them. So probably asking a question about other possibilities could be really helpful. Hey, like if you had to guess, what's their story? Like, let's just pretend that they're not being a jerk and that actually this is really hard for them. What do you think their story is? Like, what do you think is actually happening? Like, I've noticed they're really stressed out lately and things aren't really working for them and things aren't going well. So to me, maybe it's getting some shortcuts, like some hacks, which I think are often good questions. Like, what are the good questions you can ask somebody to help them let the other person get into their shoes? How does that resonate?
Yeah, great. Thanks. So we discussed great frameworks today, and let's try to test the framework and apply it to real life situations from our listeners. So the first question came from a listener. She is facing a challenge with her manager who tends to micromanage her, and it's causes additional stress, of course. And she wants to have a conversation, and she wants to express her need of autonomy. Do you have any tips for starting and leading that type of conversation?
Yes. Okay. So this is a situation where the person feels like they want to be less micromanaged, they want more autonomy, and somehow they have to tell their manager this. Is that So I love the recognition. For those of you who know Dr. Becky, child psychologist, she always says two things are true, right? Which is the manager is micromanaging, and there's probably a likely trying to be helpful in here, right? So that helps me think about this communication. So I like using an and statement. I like having some recognition that they're helping. I like sharing impact so the person knows what impact they're having. And then I love, like, this, one of my favorite words is partnership. Like, showing that you want to be in partnership will allow for trust building and good intent. So if I had to try on some words that I will try, it could be something like, I'm so appreciative of how much you help on projects and get involved. And I also want to leverage your time and use my skills to knock these projects out of the park. You know, when you get involved at a more detailed level, I think it takes away from your time. And I actually feel a little bit more stressed doing the work because I feel a little bit less ownership. I'm hoping we can partner to find the right balance for both of us.
All right. Our next question is from a listener who shared a situation where her manager often takes credit for her work, using it to boost his profile. And I want to be very gender neutral here, so it could be the reverse as well. The genders could be reversed here. But she's eager to gain recognition for her contributions and advance her career. What strategies would you suggest for her to address this situation and shine in her own light? And make sure that she can get credit for the work she's doing.
Okay. Thank you for the very hard situation. Appreciate it. I think this is hard because if you do want to give feedback, and it's really hard to tell someone that they're taking credit for the work, right? We can put them on the defensive, so that's hard. So I think maybe what I'll give you are phrases that I think could work. So I'm hoping you can help me advocate to, like, rise in the organization or take on better projects in the organization because I'm really working on my branding, right? Like, one way is creating opportunities for me to shine and let people better understand my skills. I'm hoping we can partner on ways to do this. So could we more explicitly share some of the work I'm doing? I fully understand that might be passive aggressive, like it might be a little passive, but it's a tricky situation. So that's one option. If you wanted to do a little bit more, maybe a little bit more direct, this is where Igor Curious Before Furious comes in. So it could be something like, hey, when I think about our team, like, sometimes our work is linked to our team or sometimes our work is linked to you. And I was curious, like, how do you think about that, right? Because there are times where humanly, like, I also want to get direct credit for the work I was doing. And I'm hoping you might be willing to, like, help me shine a light on some of the things I'm doing. So I don't know if these are great, perfect answers because this is a messy world, but maybe those are two different ways to come at it.
Yeah.
It was really beautiful podcast. The energy was amazing. And thank you so much for sharing your expertise, for sharing your framework for those who want to learn a little bit more about what you do. Maybe you have some resources you can tell how people can find you to dive a little bit deeper into.
Yeah, absolutely. So one, since we talked about Radical Candor a lot, there are lots of free resources. There's an incredible podcast. If you're interested in learning more about Radical Candor, doing a workshop, because I do think it's amazing and I brag about it because I didn't write it, you can reach out to me, LinkedIn or at my email that I'll give you, and I can send you more information. For things like executive coaching or this communicating change framework or advisory services, or frankly, just to geek out because I love doing this. If you'd like to work with me or get to know me better, you can absolutely find me on LinkedIn under Farrah Mitra. My email is farrah@greenreadgroup.com, and my website is www.greenreadgroup.com. So I would love to geek out. I'd love to partner with people. I am so passionate, clearly, about my executive coaching and my communications practice. So please do feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Farrah. This was fantastic. Really, really appreciate you joining us. And we can't wait to hear all the other frameworks that come out of the Farrah Labs.
Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for having me. I get really excited about this stuff. I want to tell people more about things in the world so that they can improve and grow. And so giving me this opportunity to talk to you about it was amazing. So thank you both as well.